You typed a password today, maybe several. You did not think about it. That is the point of a password. It is supposed to be the boring part. You typed it, the page went away, you got on with your life. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to actually try to answer it before I do. Where did it go? Not the login screen, the password, the actual characters you typed. They left your keyboard and they went somewhere. To a company, into a system, into some kind of storage, and they are still there right now, in some form, on a machine you have never seen, in a building you could not find, run by people you will never meet. So what does that thing look like sitting in there? Most people have a vague picture, something like a locked filing cabinet, a list of names, and next to each name a password, safe behind a wall. If that picture is right, you should be terrified. And here is the uncomfortable part. For a lot of the internet's history, that picture was right. There is a company that had 32 million passwords stored exactly like that, not encrypted, not scrambled, typed out, readable. And in December 2009, somebody walked out with all of them. That file still exists. It is still being used against people today, 16 years later. There is a good chance that a password you personally have used in your life is sitting in it right now. In the next half hour, I am going to take you through the whole journey. The real one. What happens in the 200 milliseconds after you press enter? The 3 different ways companies have stored your password, from catastrophically bad to genuinely good, and how to tell which one you are trusting. And the answer to the question that this whole episode is really about. Why does one company being breached leak your account at a completely different company that was never breached at all? Because that is the part that does not make intuitive sense. And once you see the mechanism, you will never look at the login box the same way again. Let us follow the keystrokes. You press enter. What happens next takes less time than a blink, and there are about 6 distinct stages in it. First, your browser rats what you typed in encryption. This is the part most people have heard of. The padlock, the letters HTTPS. Your password is scrambled for the journey so that anyone sitting between you and the destination sees noise. I want to be precise about what this protects you from, because it is routinely oversold. Transport encryption protects your password from someone watching the road, the cafe Wi-Fi, the internet provider, somebody with a device between you and the exchange. It is genuinely important and it is genuinely solved. It does absolutely nothing about what happens when your password arrives. Second, it arrives. And at the moment of arrival, this is the critical instant of the entire episode, the company's server is holding your password in plain, readable form. It has to. It is just decrypted the connection to read what you sent. For that instant, in the memory of that machine, your password exists exactly as you typed it. Everything that matters is decided by what the software does in the next few milliseconds. Third, it looks up your account. Your email address or your username finds a row in a database. Fourth, it has to answer one question. Does the password this person just sent match the password this account is supposed to have? And there are only 2 ways to answer that question. The first way is to have your password stored, compare the 2, and see if they are the same. The second way is to have stored something derived from your password, something you cannot work backwards from. Do the same derivation on what was just typed and compare the 2 derived values. Those 2 approaches look identical to you. The login page is the same, the experience is the same, the password is either right or wrong, and you never learn anything else. But the difference between them is the difference between a company losing your password when it gets breached and a company losing nothing that can be used against you at all. Fifth, if it matches, the server gives your browser a session token, a temporary badge that says, this browser has already proved who it is, which is why you are not asked again on every page. Sixth, and this is the one nobody thinks about, what did the server do with the plain copy of your password after it finished checking? In a well-built system, nothing. It falls out of memory and is gone. In a badly built system, it goes in a log file, a debug log written during development that somebody forgot to switch off. And now your password is sitting in plain text in a diagnostic file that has none of the protection the password database has, and that gets copied to backup systems and shipped off to log analysis tools and shared with contractors. That is not hypothetical. It is one of the most common ways passwords leak, and it has happened to companies whose engineering you would consider excellent. So, 6 stages, one of which is a decision that determines everything. Let us look at the worst possible version of that decision. December 2009, there's a company called RockYou. If you were on the internet at the time, you used their software without knowing it. They made the widgets and quizzes and slideshow applications that were bolted onto social networks in that era. Millions of people made accounts. And RockYou stored every one of those passwords as text, not scrambled, not hashed, not protected in any way. If a RockYou employee opened the right table in the database, they could read your password with their eyes. In December of that year, an attacker used a technique called SQL injection, essentially typing a command into a box that expects a name and having the database run it, and pulled the whole table out, 32 million accounts, emails and passwords in the clear. Now, the breach itself was bad. What happened afterwards is why we are still talking about it 16 years later, because that file did not disappear. It got published. And once you have 32 million real passwords chosen by 32 million real human beings, you no longer have a list of stolen credentials. You have a map of how human beings choose passwords. Somebody took that file, stripped out the email addresses, removed the duplicates, and sorted what was left by how often it appeared. What came out is a list of 14,344,392 unique passwords, ordered from most common to least. It is called rockyou.txt, and it is, without much competition, the most widely used file in the history of password cracking. It ships with security tools. It is the default word list in tutorials. It is used every day, right now, in attacks and in the legitimate security testing that defends against them. And here is what it does to you personally. If your password appears anywhere in that list, then your password is not a secret. It is an entry in a numbered file that any attacker on Earth can download in a few seconds. Trying all 14 million of them against a target is not clever work. On modern hardware, it is a rounding error. The list contains the obvious ones, of course, but it also contains the ones you think are clever. Your name with a number after it. A word with the letter A replaced by an @ sign. A season and a year. A keyboard pattern that feels random because your fingers made a shape. Human beings are astonishingly consistent, and that file is the proof. And I should be fair about something, because this file is not only a weapon. The same list is the backbone of legitimate defensive work. When a security team tests its own organization, this is what they test against. Because there is no point defending against exotic attacks while half the staff are using something that sits in the first 10,000 lines. When a service checks whether the password you just chose is a known breach one, lists like this are what it is checking against. It is the same file doing both jobs. That is generally how this field works. The map of how people actually behave is valuable to whoever holds it, and both sides hold it. But notice what that means for you. The defenders and the attackers are working from the same document. There is no asymmetry left. The idea that your password is obscure, that nobody would think of that particular word, stopped being true the moment 32 million people demonstrated in a published file exactly how unoriginal all of us are together. RockYou eventually settled charges with the Federal Trade Commission over the breach. The company is gone. The file is immortal. And RockYou was not unusual for its time. It is simply the one we can all read. That is worth remembering whenever a breach from that era surfaces. Plain text storage was not an exotic failure. For a long stretch of the consumer internet, it was ordinary. The fix for storing passwords in plain text has existed since long before RockYou, and it is genuinely elegant. It is called hashing. Here is the idea. A hash function is a piece of mathematics that takes any input and produces a fixed size scramble of it. Feed it your password, and it produces a long string of characters that looks like nonsense. Two properties make it useful. It is deterministic. The same input always produces exactly the same output. Every time, on every machine, forever. And it is one way. Given the output, there is no procedure that reverses it back to the input. It is not encryption. Encryption is a locked box with a key, and if you have the key, you get the contents back. A hash has no key and no contents. The original is not in there. It is genuinely gone. So now the company can do something rather beautiful. When you set your password, they hash it and store only the hash. When you log in, they hash what you just typed and compare the two hashes. Same input, same output. So if the hashes match, the password's matched, and they have never stored your password at all. Think about what that means when the database gets stolen. The attacker gets a list of usernames and a list of scrambles. There is no reversing procedure. The passwords are not in the file in any meaningful sense. There's also a rather good test you could run on any company, and I want you to actually use this one. If you click Forgot My Password and the company emails you your existing password, they are not hashing. They cannot be. To send it to you, they have to have it. That is a company storing your password in a recoverable form. And in the year we are living in, that is a decision, not an accident. A company that hashes properly cannot tell you your password. It genuinely does not know it. All it can do is let you set a new one. So hashing solves everything, right? No. And the reason why is one of the most important ideas in modern security, so I want to build it carefully. The hash cannot be reversed. That is true, and it stays true. But nobody serious tries to reverse it. Here's what they do instead. They take a guess at a password, say the first entry in that rockyou list, and they hash it using the same public standard hash function the company used. Then they compare that result against every hash in the stolen file. If it matches, they have your password, not by reversing anything, by guessing and checking the guess. So the attack on a stolen hash file is simply guess, hash, compare. Over and over. Which means the only question that matters is how many guesses can they make per second. And this is where the first generation of hashing went wrong, because the hash functions everybody reached for, names like MD5 and SHA1, were designed for a completely different job. They were built to verify that a large file downloaded correctly or that a message had not been altered in transit. For those jobs, speed is the entire point. You want to hash a gigabyte in an instant. Then people use those same functions for passwords. A tool designed to be as fast as physically possible, guarding a secret whose only defense is that guessing takes too long. On hardware built for the purpose, the same graphics processors that render games, which are extraordinarily good at doing one simple operation billions of times in parallel, a fast hash can be computed at rates that make the whole exercise absurd. Every password in that 14 million entry rockyou list can be hashed and checked against a stolen database in a length of time best measured with a kitchen timer. There was a second problem, and it was even worse. Remember that a hash is deterministic. The same input always produces the same output. So if 10,000 people in a stolen database all chose the same popular password, all 10,000 of them have the identical hash sitting next to their name. Which means an attacker does not even need to crack them individually. Crack one, and you have cracked all 10,000 for free. And you can see, just by counting duplicates, which passwords are the popular ones before you have cracked a single account. Worse still, you could pre-compute. Someone with time could hash every likely password once, store the results in an enormous lookup table, and from then on, cracking is not computation at all. It is a database search. Those tables have a name: rainbow tables. The fix for that half of the problem is called assault, and it is almost insultingly simple. Before hashing, the system generates a large random value, unique to you. That is the salt, and combines it with your password. The salt is stored alongside the hash in the open. It is not a secret, and it does not need to be, because now your hash and my hash are different even if we chose the same password. The duplicate counting trick dies. Pre-computed tables die because a table would have to be built separately for every salt. And the attacker is forced back into the only thing left, guessing against your account alone, one at a time. Which brings us to the case that made all of this concrete for the entire industry. In 2012, LinkedIn was breached. Roughly 6.5 million password hashes were posted publicly. They were SHA1, a fast, general-purpose hash, and they were unsalted. Fast and unsalted, both mistakes at once. Large portions of that set were cracked within days. And there is a coda to it that is worth holding on to, because it says something about breaches generally. For 4 years, everyone believed that breach was 6.5 million accounts. In May 2016, the real data surfaced for sale. It was not 6.5 million. It was around 117 million. LinkedIn had to force a password reset on users who had not changed their password since 2012, 4 years after the incident everyone thought was closed. The company's storage practices today are a different world from that. But sit with the lesson for a second, because it applies to every breach you will ever read about. The number announced on day one is a floor, not a ceiling. It is the size of what was found, not the size of what was taken. October 2013, Adobe, 153 million records. And what came out of that breach is, I think, the single most instructive security failure of the last 20 years. Not because it was the biggest, but because of how the passwords were broken. The attackers barely had to do any cryptography at all. Adobe did not store passwords in plain text. They knew better than RockYou. But they also did not hash them. They encrypted them with an algorithm called DDES and a mode called ECB. Remember the distinction from earlier. Encryption is a locked box with a key. It is reversible by design, which means the plain passwords were recoverable, sitting behind exactly one thing, the secrecy of a key held by the same company that just got breached. That alone would be a serious failure. But the mode is what turned it into a public spectacle. ECB mode has one behavior you need to understand. It is deterministic without assault. The same input always produces the same ciphertext. You have already seen why that is fatal. It is the duplicate problem again. Identical passwords produce byte for byte identical stored values. Anyone with the file could sort it and instantly see which encrypted blobs were the most common ones and therefore which accounts shared a password without breaking anything. They still would not know what the password was. They would just know that these 400,000 people all chose the same one. And then Adobe made the third mistake, and this is the one that finished it. Alongside every account, they stored the user's password hint in plain text. Password hints, the little note you write to remind yourself, and human beings, it turns out, write hints like, usual one, name of my dog plus year. It's password. A remarkable number of people simply wrote the password itself. Now put the two together. Take one encrypted blob. Find all the accounts that share it. Remember, ECB makes them identical. Read every one of their hints side by side. One person's hint says color. Another says my favorite. A third gives you 4 letters of it. A fourth just types it out. You have not attacked the encryption. You have not needed the key. You have simply read a crowd's worth of clues about a single shared secret, and the crowd has told you the answer. Researchers reconstructed the most common passwords in that database in a matter of hours and published them, not with cryptanalysis, with crossword logic. And there is a very satisfying epilogue. The current version of the American Standard for Digital Identity, the NIST guidance that a large part of the industry builds against, now says flatly that systems shall not use password hints or knowledge-based security questions. That is not an abstract preference. That is a rule written in the shape of this exact disaster. So, not plain text, not encryption, hashing, but not a fast hash, and always salted. The answer the field arrived at is one of my favorite ideas in all of computer science, because it is a deliberate inversion of everything engineering normally values. You make it slow, on purpose. In 1999, 2 researchers, Niels Provos and David Mazières, presented an algorithm called bcrypt. It is a hash function built specifically for passwords, and it has 2 properties. The general purpose hashes lacked. It salts automatically. The salt is not something the developer has to remember to add. It is baked into the design. And it has a work factor, a dial. You set a number, and that number controls how much computation the hash costs. Turn it up, and every single hash takes longer. Here is the trade, and it is a wonderful trade. For you, logging in, the cost is 1 hash. Set the dial so that takes, say, 1/4 of a second. You will not notice 1/4 of a second. Nobody has ever abandoned an account because logging in took 1/4 of a second. For an attacker with a stolen database, the cost is 1 hash per guess, and they need billions of guesses. 1/4 of a second times 1 billion is roughly 8 years. You have converted an attack that took an afternoon into one that outlives the relevance of the data, and you paid 1/4 of a second for it. The other half of that design is the reason it has survived 26 years. Computers get faster. An attack that takes 8 years today takes considerably less in a decade. a fixed algorithm would slowly rot. But bcrypt has a dial. So as hardware improves, you turn it up. The stored hashes record which setting they were made with, so old passwords keep working while new ones get stronger. The defense ages with the attack. The field has moved on since. In July 2015, an open competition to find a successor concluded, and the winner was an algorithm called Argon 2, designed by a team at the University of Luxembourg. Argon 2 adds a further idea: it is deliberately memory hard. It does not just take time, it requires a substantial chunk of memory to compute that is aimed at a very specific enemy. The specialized hardware that makes mass guessing cheap, the graphics cards, the custom chips, gets its power from running thousands of tiny computations in parallel. Those parallel units are individually starved of memory, so an algorithm that demands real memory for every single guess attacks the economics of the attacker's hardware directly. Slow for the guesser, instant for you. That is the whole art. Now we can answer the question this episode is actually about. Suppose your bank does everything right. Argon 2, properly salted, a sensible work factor, no hints, no recoverable storage. Your bank has never been breached. Nothing about your bank has ever leaked. And your bank account gets taken anyway. How? In January 2019, the security researcher Troy Hunt, the man behind the breach notification service, Have I Been Pweened, published an analysis of a collection of data that had been circulating on a file sharing site. It was about 87 gigabytes across roughly 12,000 files. He called it Collection Number 1. Inside, 773 million unique email addresses, 21 million unique passwords, nearly 2.7 billion rows of email and password pairs. And a crucial detail, the one that makes it matter, is that Collection Number 1 was not a new breach. Nobody had hacked anything to produce it. It was an aggregation. Somebody had gathered the output of thousands of separate incidents over many years, deduplicated it, cleaned it up, and assembled the results into one searchable archive. That is the real product of the breach economy, not any single theft, the merged file. Here is how it is used, and it is depressingly simple. It is called credential stuffing. You take a pair from the file, an email address, and a password that works somewhere. Once, you do not attack anybody's cryptography. You go to a completely different service and you log in, normally, through the front door. With software that does it a few thousand times a minute across a list, you are not guessing a password. You are testing whether a person reused one. And that is the mechanism. That is the answer. The company that gets breached is not the company where you lose something. It is simply the company that had the worst storage. It might be a forum you joined for one weekend in 2011 that hashed with MD5. That no longer exists. The password from that forum is now in the merged file. And the merged file is tried against your email provider, your bank, your cloud storage, every service that matters. Because the only thing that ever connected them was you, deciding, understandably, that you could not remember 12 different passwords. Which means your security at every site you use is not determined by the best site you use. It is determined by the worst one. That is the sentence I would like you to leave with. Every account you hold sits behind the weakest storage of any company that has ever held that password. So what do you do about it? And I want to be careful here because most advice about this is 30 years out of date, and some of it is actively harmful. Let me start with what the current standard says, because a lot of it will surprise you. The American standard I mentioned, NIST, Special Publication, 863B, is what a large share of serious organizations build against. Its current guidance says the following, and every one of these is a reversal of what you were taught. No forced periodic rotation. Being made to change your password every 90 days is not a security measure. It never was. When you force people to change a working password on a schedule, they do not invent a new strong one 12 times a year. They append a number. The standard now says systems shall not require it, absent evidence of compromise. No mandatory complexity rules. The one uppercase, one number, one symbol requirement produces astonishingly predictable results. A capital at the front, a number, and an exclamation mark at the end. It makes passwords annoying for you and barely harder for the attacker. gone. Length matters more than symbol soup. The floor is 8 characters, 15 is recommended where a password is doing the work alone, and systems should accept at least 64 so long passphrases actually work. Check new passwords against known breached lists. Rather than demanding decoration, compare the candidate to the corpus of already leaked passwords, files exactly like the one RockYou produced, and refuse it if it is in there. And no hints and no security questions. Adobe, permanently. Now the practical part. There are only 3 things, and they are in order of how much they matter. 1. Every password must be different. This is the whole episode in one instruction. Reuse is the mechanism that converts somebody else's failure into your loss. Nothing else on this list matters as much. Which means you need a password manager, because unique passwords for every account is not achievable by memory and never was. One strong passphrase that you actually remember, protecting a vault that generates and remembers everything else. And I know the objection because it is the first thing everybody says, and it is a reasonable objection. Isn't that putting all my eggs in one basket? Yes, deliberately. Let me argue it properly rather than waving it away. Right now, without a manager, you have a system too. You are reusing a small number of passwords across dozens of services, which means your eggs are already in one basket. They are just in a basket built out of every company that has ever held one of those passwords, including the ones that stored them in plain text and the ones that no longer exist. You did not avoid concentration. You concentrated your risk in the hands of strangers, distributed across the worst-run companies you have ever signed up to. A manager moves that concentration somewhere you can actually reason about. The vault is encrypted on your device before anything is sent anywhere, with a key derived from your passphrase using exactly the kind of slow, memory-hard function this episode has been describing. The provider stores a blob they cannot read. When a password manager company is breached, and some have been, what leaks is that blob, and the attack that follows is a guessing attack against your one passphrase. Which is why the one passphrase should be long and unique and not a descendant of anything you have used elsewhere. 4 or 5 unrelated words is genuinely fine. Length is what defeats guessing, and you only have to remember this one. So, it is not a choice between concentrated risk and distributed risk. It is a choice between concentration you control and concentration you do not. 2. Turn on the second factor wherever it is offered and prefer an authenticator app or a hardware key over text messages since phone numbers can be taken from you. 3. And this is where it is all heading, passkeys. A passkey works on a different principle entirely. Your device holds a private key that never leaves it and is never sent anywhere. The site holds a matching public key that is useless on its own. When you sign in, your device proves it holds the private key without ever transmitting it. Which means when that site is breached, the attacker gets a pile of public keys. And there is no password in the file because there was never a password in the file. The category of failure this entire episode has described stops existing. Every login you move to a passkey is one fewer entry in some future. Number 2. So, the password you typed this morning. It traveled encrypted, arrived readable, and lived or died on a decision made by an engineer you will never meet in a code base you will never see, possibly years before you made the account. You cannot inspect that decision. You cannot audit it. The login page looks the same whether the company is running Argon 2 with a proper work factor or storing your password in a column called tpassworded. That is the honest and slightly uncomfortable conclusion of this episode. You do not get to control how your password is stored. You never did. What you control is the blast radius. Whether one company's failure is one company's problem or the key to your entire life. Unique passwords everywhere, a manager to make that possible, a second factor, and passkeys wherever they are offered. That is it. That is the whole defense, and it works precisely because it assumes the companies will fail. Next week we stay with the systems you use without thinking and go to the one you trust with actual cash. An ATM is a safe with a computer bolted to it, standing outdoors, unattended, all night. Card skimming is not a hack in the way films imagine it. It is a physical craft with tooling, and it is far more ordinary than you would like. Next episode, ATM and card fraud. How skimming actually works and what it looks like when it is on the machine in front of you. Thanks for staying to the end. The rest of the series is on the channel.